from Georgia State University Center for International Business Education and Research, CIBER, in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Lian Liu. We come to you on behalf of the MSI CIBER Consortium that are sponsoring and organizing this webinar series. We thank each and every one of you for coming from all over the world. We're really grateful that you choose to spend the hour with us out of your busy schedule. This is the 59th webinar since we started from April 2020. As a reminder, these webinars are being recorded. If you want to watch again or forward to others, you can find the recording of this one and previous sessions on our GSU-CIBER website or our YouTube channel. Today's webinar is another collaboration with Emerald Publishing. It's a groundbreaking one because this is an all-woman panel on the provocative topic of diverse representation in global business. The moderator is Erica Valenti, the Executive Vice President of Emerald Publishing. Before Emerald, Erica has worked with the Royal Society, MIT Press, Canadian Science Publishing, and clients in the US, Europe, Brazil, China, India, and other countries. Erica will moderate the Wonder Woman panel of a researcher, a CEO, and a publisher. Thank you, Erica. Please take over.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Leanne. And I want to start with thanking the CIBER team just for facilitating this opportunity to talk with everybody today, whether it be morning, afternoon, or evening. I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if the slides are visible to everyone. Okay. Yeah. So thank you for the introduction, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And it is a real pleasure to moderate today's talk, which is very much a passion project for Emerald and for all the people that are going to be speaking with us today. The process of becoming a diverse, equitable research community requires a lot of concerted work and sustained commitment by everyone in the scholarly ecosystem, not just those who perceive themselves to be at the margins for one reason or another. For Emerald Publishing, pursuing diversity in a variety of dimensions is truthfully a moral imperative, especially given the way that certain groups of people have been treated historically. We believe that programs and practices that favor diversity are essential. We absolutely should all attend to ambitious diversification efforts as a means of reversing the effect of systematic injustices over time. So, where are the women in teaching cases? Only 11% of top used teaching cases have a female protagonist, and the percentage for women of color is significantly lower, although it's hard to go lower than 11%. And we know that business schools across the globe are striving for enrollment gender parity. But the real question is, what does it mean for women in business school, in the classroom, using materials where they don't see themselves? So this session is going to be a call to arms. We think it is high time to positively represent women in both leadership positions in the workplace, and it's time to impact the status quo. We have three amazing speakers today. First, we're going to hear from Leslie Simons. She is the founder of the Case for Women, and this group conducts research into the presence of women in case papers. Next, we'll pass to Alyssa Sangster. She is the CEO of Forte. This organization really is about encouraging and addressing issues affecting women's ability to seek, prepare for, and attain business leadership positions. Then finally, we'll hear from Emerald's own Gabby Rundle. She is the product manager for Emerald Publishing's teaching cases, and it's going to be a really great lineup. After the speakers have spoken with us, we'll open up the floor to questions, which I will do my best to moderate. So I'm going to pass now to Leslie and stop sharing.
So what I'd like to do is share with you some of my research findings to set the stage for today. It's mainly on women and gender in business school case papers. We have expanded to other diverse groups, but today I'm just sharing with you on women. So this is some of what we've been doing. So if you look at what our research looks at the case center case papers, and a lot of you might know who the case center is, but every year they have award-winning papers. There's 10 every year, and it's those papers that we research. The reason there's 119 and not 120 is because one paper won for 2 years. The other thing to know about this is in the award-winning cases, they're the cases that are most widely distributed across universities or schools. And then what we do is we cross-reference with the 3 best-selling cases each year. And I think, sadly to say, the reason there's only 6 different best-selling case papers is because the same best-selling papers win every year, just about. So that's on 12 years, we've only got 6 different papers. So altogether, we have 105 different cases. So this is what we found. Of the 125 papers, 123 mention men in it, have men active in the papers. 84 papers have a woman mentioned in it, which you might look at that and say, oh, that's great. What I will show you is how that number has grown over the years, and the fact that I think this is where, with what is going on in this space, where they're beginning to add characters. And then, but we feel that there's actually only 58 papers where a woman, we see her as being present. And what do we mean by that? We mean that she plays an active role in the paper. She's not mentioned as the CEO's wife, or she's not mentioned as the PA who brings in the coffee. It's more about she's in an integral role relevant to the paper's outcomes. And there's 41 papers that don't have a woman in them at all. Of the 125 papers, 96 have a male protagonist. 14 have a female protagonist. The balance don't have any protagonists in them at all. And of the 14, actually only 12 of those papers were originally women, because 3 papers were written by the same person who I contacted. Basically, he changed the names of 2 of his papers from a man to a woman, because he was conscious that his female students were not seeing or reading women protagonists. However, he didn't change the descriptors. And in 6 of these papers, she is absolutely the only woman in the paper, despite being the protagonist. So let's just look at how women in papers has changed over time. So if you look at initially my research, when we started, there was only 55% of papers with women in them. And gradually that's grown, 67 to 83% now. And I think this is an area where because of the noise around this topic, people are beginning to add female characters into papers, or even maybe changing names on some of the characters. However, if we look at the women protagonists, to be honest, it's gone down, but it's basically remained flat. So we're still not getting women leaders in these papers. So men still outnumber women generally, 5 to 1 in papers. So for every 1 woman, there's 5 men. Some of the extra themes that come out of this were things like invisibility of women leaders, so there's no role models. Often you find that the women leaders are found in what we call pink topics or places of work, which they are in this. So that might be places like fashion, furniture, retail, health. There's a prevalence of men, and Shine's research of, when we think of a manager, we tend to think masculine or male. So it does actually show this, and there's no interaction of women about women, other women within the business, with women in the business. So let's look at the invisibility of women. So I took the Bechdel test, or the Mo movie test. Some of you might know this test, which is a test that's still going, and you can look at it online, and movies are still being measured by this way. So basically we measure women's presence in movies. It has to have 2 women in it who talk to one another about something besides a man. And I took this to be the Simon's test, where it has to have, so a case or even an article, a business article, has to have a woman in it. And this encourages more women to appear in the papers. Then I said, who is the protagonist? So encourages women to be shown as leaders, middle managers, or up to C-suite. And the reason I say that is a lot of the cases with male leaders or protagonists are actually middle managers. They're not even at CEO level. So there's plenty of examples to show women here. And finally, and the most important, I believe, who speaks, so the leader who speaks to another woman about the business. So it ensures she's not the only woman in the paper. Because if that happens, there's all sorts of other biases that are shown by this. So if we look at this, at the Simon's test, at the moment we have 84 papers which have a woman in it, 14 where she is the leader, and sadly, we only have 4 where she speaks to another woman about the business. If we look at the what I call think manager, think male concept, 125 papers of 123 mention a man. 96 have a male protagonist with descriptors like tough but fair, results driven, father figure. 14 have a female protagonist, and of that 14, 12 of the protagonists, her qualities are not described at all. So let's just look at the writers. Again, primary writers and secondary writers are mainly men, although slightly better percentage of female writers than the secondary writers. But again, it is mainly men that are writing these papers. So I've just some lessons we've learned and what's next on what we're doing. So I've researched over 1,500 cases. I've audited podcast videos, classroom simulations, business textbooks, classroom tutorials, online learning modules. And I've audited for multiple levels of diversity, so not just gender, and obviously got gender work on 12 years of research. And I've done the same audit on 7 business schools' core curricula. I have to say that the findings are not much different. Very rare to be different. Sad. So just a couple of things I wanted to say is, if you want to research this for yourself, if you're counting women leaders, you need to make sure that you count men or others too. And if you're counting race and ethnicity with particular focus on people of color, you also need to count white or other people too. And for example, it's not just about the top line numbers. Only counting women leaders doesn't give a true picture. If you look at this, a majority of women leaders in papers are alone and surrounded by many male characters, and male leaders are surrounded by other men. So most leaders of color are alone too. And these stats show bias on many levels. So 6 things we've learned from researching. What we've realized is bias influences the accurate analysis of papers. People will miss even obvious characters. Reading or viewing too many papers or material in one day increases inaccuracy. Results should be checked by a second person, always. And researchers should have regular meetings or chats to share knowledge of the process. And schools should annually review their core material list. And finally, what's happening now? Obviously, we have a Case for Women case competition with Emerald to really promote more women protagonist cases. We've also built a framework for auditing or reviewing curricular base on multiple DI categories and worldviews. We audit and review publishers, organizations, business schools, core material and teaching material. And we continue with this research each year. And we also do workshops in collaboration with the MBA Roundtable, who also sponsors the Emerald competition. So Where Are the Women just gives you a start. Thank you for listening. And I will now pass you over to Alyssa.
Okay, there we go. So thanks. And Leslie, it's always just wonderful to hear your presentation and to hear kind of what steps have been made since we originally started working together. But just so everybody knows, we have worked with the Case for Women to really establish with our business school partners and our corporate partners what the concern and the issue is here around having more women, female case protagonists. And so what I wanted to talk a little bit about is kind of what Forte is doing outside of even just this issue around female protagonists and around this case writing competition, but just what is the workplace looking like today, and what is it that women are facing as they enter these business fields. And really, we were created about 20 years ago as an organization to look at how we could advance more women into the business profession and also have them as leaders and enrolled in business school in equal numbers to their male counterparts. Our vision is really around bringing together this community of women in all of the various career stages that they're in, from college all the way up to senior levels in business leadership, and bringing the companies and the business schools who are interested in having them in their audience and educating them, connecting them, inspiring them to move up that corporate ladder. And obviously, these business schools are looking for the women to enroll, and the companies are interested in hiring them into their leadership pipeline. If you don't know some of these numbers, I just thought I would share. It gives you a sense of the landscape of what's happening across a lot of different divisions and how women are doing in those spaces. So one of the great things that is out there is the number of women enrolled in business school today. And in our partner schools, that number is at 41% this year. You can see that the percentage of Fortune 500 CEOs is quite a bit lower there at 7%. That number has been increasing, but very slowly. S&P 500 board members, 27%, senior execs, 27%. The pay gap still persists across gender, and it's even lower for women of color. And then venture funding, one of the worst statistics there, just the numbers being invested. I've seen articles that things are improving and the pandemic has maybe helped that, but this was a number that we had just calculated. So we'll see if that number improves, but still a long way to go. I mentioned the business school enrollments. One of the things on this slide that's so interesting is to see the mix of 40% or greater is in the purple, and that really shows you how many schools have made that big leap up to 40%. You can see from 2001, when we first started calculating, now to 2021, how that number has grown, and how the pink bar at the bottom, the less than 30%, is almost off the chart here in 2021. And that means that we've seen a lot of improvement across those business school partners. Some of the work that Forte does is really to help women reimagine what's possible. So thinking about what is that career path that I'm going on, making sure that they understand all the options that are available to them and how business intersects with those industries and those companies and those career paths, and why it's important for them to have that business language and acumen as they go into their careers. We want them to accelerate their career. So we want them to be sure that they are looking for these leadership opportunities. We want to open those networks, those opportunities, give them the education they need in order to have access to those networks, and then make sure that they are prepared and thinking about how that career path is going to progress and what they need to be doing to prepare for that. And then finally, financial support. So a lot of the programs that Forte offers to women are free programs. They're subsidized by our school and our corporate partners. And we also offer Forte fellowships. Many of the business schools, actually all of the MBA programs that we work with, offer financial support for women pursuing an MBA. And so these fellowships are available to women through the Forte network. And it's one of the things we know is critical to seeing more women advance into those business schools and into business leadership, is providing or breaking down that barrier and that obstacle to pursuing graduate business education. So those are kind of the key areas that Forte focuses on, but one that I wanted to focus in on particularly is some work we've done around male allyship. So in addition to partnering with the Case for Women to better provide better awareness for our business schools, to let them know that there was this problem of female protagonists or lack of them in business school curriculum, we also built a Men as Allies curriculum. And so this gives men in business schools and men in the corporate world a very positive way to engage around the gender equity discussion. And it allows them to really do a lot of self-reflection and to build kind of a mindset or a leadership concept of how they want to move forward as a business leader, and how they want to create their own teams, their own opportunities in the workplace, and how they can think about their female counterparts and what challenges they may be having, and make sure that they've addressed all of those and can really move into these leadership roles as an inclusive leader. So here you see just a suite of programs and content and materials, I guess, that you can access through the Forte network. The first one is on the left, the MBA toolkit, and it really does focus in on how MBA students can have this gender equity conversation in the classroom, outside of the classroom, with their MBA peers. And again, this is a chance for them to have kind of a petri dish approach where they can really test the waters here while they're in school and think about that future concept of a leader. And then as our students graduated and moved into the corporate world, many of them said, this would be an amazing thing for me to have in the workplace. So we built this corporate toolkit. The toolkit has then morphed into multiple different things, how to create a Male Allies program in a corporate setting, this curriculum that you can deliver, this case for more diverse case protagonists. Leslie mentioned a lot of different ways that you can calculate that. This was really focused on a club level at the MBA campus, having women in business clubs be able to go in and help faculty look at their case, the cases that they're delivering, and see if they could identify ways to improve that. And, you know, case protagonist is one of those things, but then there is also a large number of inputs into the classroom from guest speakers, and Leslie mentioned doing some research more on that. I think creating this inclusive environment, protagonist is the core of that, and then really thinking about how else you engage a diverse audience in that classroom discussion. And then finally, we've also got a train the trainer program. So we really kind of committed to focusing in on this male allyship piece, knowing that having the men involved in this conversation was critical to positive outcomes for gender equity in the MBA classroom and then beyond into the corporate world. So that's a little bit more about Forte, the work we've done with Leslie in the Case for Women, and then also kind of male allyship. So I'm thrilled to be here with everybody today, and I'll pass it back to Erica at this point.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. Can everybody hear me okay? I apologize, I dropped off. The perils of me trying to manage technology is not always it's not always successful. Excellent. So I think it's time for Gabby to take the floor, and that will wrap up the speaking section.
Great, thank
Over
you.
to you,
Can you see these slides okay? Brilliant. Great. So as Erica said, I'm a cases product manager at Emerald Publishing. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Emerald Publishing to kind of increase the diversity within our case study publications. So I'm going to talk through very briefly our kind of main 3 case study publication outlets and kind of what we're doing in each one. So the case journal. This is the official journal of the Case Association, which is an organization based in North America, which promotes case writing and teaching. And kind of one of the projects in TCJ, I guess, that we're kind of most proud of at the minute is we're just about to publish the 2nd in a series of special issues on underrepresented perspectives, Black leaders in business. And over the 2 special issues, this will include, I think, around 12 to 13 case studies, all featuring Black case protagonists, predominantly in North America. There are a number of articles as well, kind of discussing similar things, I guess, that we're discussing today, about the importance of representing minorities in case studies. And we're kind of really proud of that. And that's something we're kind of wanting to continue within the case journal collection. We also published the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection, which, as the name kind of indicates, it focuses on cases from developing economy regions. So cases in there really are from around the world. There's very much a global authorship and, you know, a global coverage of where the cases themselves are based. So the protagonists in the cases in the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection really are from around the world and expose students to different regions, religions, backgrounds and cultures of these case study protagonists. And we're seeing an increase in these cases being downloaded in regions where the case itself is not based. Obviously, there tends to be kind of a correlation there, but we're finding that faculty and business schools are wanting to teach their students about regions, geographies, business managements in different regions and geographies where they're not based. And it might be that, you know, their students are likely to go on and work in these different regions and expose them to different cultures and issues in business management around the world. And that's kind of, you know, both of these are always open to submissions, and the links are on there, and these slides will be available for you afterwards. But I want to talk a bit more today about the Case for Women competition, which both Leslie and Alyssa have mentioned. So at the end of these slides, my email address is on there, because at the minute I don't have, we're yet to formally launch the 2022 competition. So if this is something you're interested in and want more information on when we come to launch that, please do drop me an email, because I'm going to be talking a bit more about what we've done rather than kind of what we're doing going forward, although we're, you know, very much hoping there will be another competition going forward and launching soon in early 2022. So the Case for Women competition, as kind of mentioned, is a collaborative effort between Emerald Publishing, the Case for Women, Forte, and MBA Roundtable. So it's a really great kind of background to this. Everyone involved in this is really, you know, as you've seen today, very passionate about this. And the aim of the competition is to encourage and promote the development of high quality teaching cases that positively represent women in leadership positions in the workplace. So I'm going to try and not repeat too much of everything kind of Leslie's said, but it's very much, this is built on the back of the research that Leslie has done. So the requirements for submissions to this competition have been that these cases need to pass the Simon's test, which Leslie talked about. So again, the importance of having more than just a single kind of token female protagonist in that being done. We want there to be more women in cases outside of just the protagonist, but obviously that's, you know, very important. The protagonist being described in a positive way is really important. We did a bit of an audit of Emerald's cases, as Leslie kind of has done elsewhere, and we found we did have a higher rate of cases with female protagonists than kind of Leslie's mentioned some of our competitors, which we're really proud of, but very often the women in the cases weren't necessarily described in a positive way, and they might be the protagonist of the case, but there were problematic issues in the case, and that's, you know, what the case dilemma was about. So I think this is really important. As I kind of mentioned, we want a mix of gender across the case, so it's not just one female protagonist and all other kind of characters within the case being male. We do want that mix. A new kind of feature that we want authors to do when submitting is include the pronouns for all characters when the name is first mentioned within the case. I think this is really important, again, you know, so when students are reading these cases, they do understand what the gender split within the case is. I think that's really important. Having a mix of industries, so the 4 Fs are, again, Leslie touched on this, furniture, family, fashion and food, but just kind of generally industries that are seen as predominantly female focused, I guess. This isn't a requirement for the competition, but we would like to see as a diverse collection in terms of industry of cases within the case women collection as possible. And so far we've really had that. You know, I think we had a number of finance and accounting cases which do tend to be predominantly men, you know, more so than the kind of average. Tech companies, yeah, so it's so far, you know, we've seen a really great kind of mix of those industries within the collection. And then finally, we want there to be an inclusion of gender in the teaching note, so that this is something that students, you know, can learn from, as well as just kind of having that exposure, which is something I'll kind of talk about a little bit more on the next slide. And then finally, there is a prize fund for this competition. So the 2021 prize, which we're in the process of judging at the minute, we have $12,000, which will be split between the top 4 cases. So there's that kind of benefit to submitting. And again, the link to more information is on this slide. So I've talked then about what we're doing, and I guess I'm going to talk now about why we're doing this and why I think this is really important. And I've got a few quotes on the screen there. So the first one I'm going to read out is from Catherine Cooper, and she was the case study protagonist of the case that came 3rd place last year in the Case for Women competition. Afterwards, we reached out to the authors and asked if they could provide us with some words on why the authors thought it was important that we were doing this. And interestingly, they asked the protagonist, who had been through business school, had read many cases predominantly featuring men. And so Catherine supplied this text with us, which I think is really interesting. So she said, "A lot of the time when you read a case study in business school, it's almost assumed that the protagonist is male, if not a white male, without it being said. So when you think about never seeing anyone or reading about anyone who is like you at all, the fact that you get to see and read about someone who is similar to you is a huge deal. It's really hard every time you have to imagine yourself in this case study. And that's what diverse or underrepresented students go through. And that's what they have to do all the time," which again, you know, I know, you know, Alyssa and Leslie has kind of talked about, but I think this is really important, that students do see themselves represented in these teaching cases and see, you know, potentially kind of role models and people they identify with in these leadership positions, and really believe that this is something that they can kind of go on to do. And I think being exposed to people you can identify with as a student is massively important. And then the next 2 quotes I'm kind of going to talk through, which kind of give another 2 reasons why we're doing this, are from Mary Forster, who is the guest editor of the Case Journal special issue that I mentioned before. This is from her editorial. So in this, she's kind of specifically talking about Black leaders in business, but I think both of these kind of represent generally the importance of having diverse case protagonists. So you said, "Educators have a responsibility to help students see themselves as being capable of meeting workplace challenges and help them acquire the skills to do so." And I think this is slightly different from what Catherine is saying. I think what Catherine is saying here is that it's very important that students are exposed to this. But I think educators and also publishers, which I'll kind of add in there, do have this responsibility to help students see themselves in these roles. You know, I think as a publisher, we are providing educators with the tools to teach students going into doing MBA programs, going into the business world. I think we have the responsibility to do that. And then Mary also talks about the importance of featuring diverse protagonists, not just for students who can identify with them, but for students that don't. So she says, teaching cases featuring Black, African Americans can also help students, minority and majority, disadvantaged and advantaged, grapple with the legal, ethical, moral, personal, and practical implications of racism, discrimination, conscious bias, and unconscious bias. And I think this is really important. Again, Leslie mentioned the kind of leadership equals kind of male. And I think that's something, again, Catherine mentions kind of male equals white male. That's kind of what we're in case studies being published. And I think it's really important that we kind of break down that idea for all students. And then obviously Alyssa talked a lot about kind of male allyship. I think it's important that students who maybe aren't in the diverse group that the protagonist is representing are exposed to problems that female business leaders or Black business leaders are being faced with. And I think it's really important that all students have that exposure, whether they're kind of within that demographic or not. So my next few slides are really just kind of links if this is something you're interested to research more on. So there's a link there to our case collections, another link to the Case for Women competition, which, as I said, will be updated shortly with more information on the 2022 competition. We have the Emerald Cases Hub, which is a free online resource for authors wanting to write or faculty wanting to teach with cases, and our editors talking through different aspects of teaching and writing, and also learning with case studies, so for students. There's a link to a podcast that, again, Alyssa and Leslie were involved in if you want to hear more about this, and then a link to our North America publishing page. And finally, there is my email address, so please do reach out if you have any questions after this. Right, I will stop sharing now and hand back to Erica to kind of start a bit more of a discussion.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gabby, Alyssa, and Leslie. I've heard from you each before, but every time I listen again, I find something else that's incredibly compelling as a proof point, motivating as a call to arms. And I'm biased because I work at Emerald, but it's high time that publishing houses commit to publishing research that looks like the current world. So thank you for all those, all that great information. One thing is, I saw only one question in the chat, which I believe was answered, and it was about the question of Forte and whether MBA students from any program can join. Leanne, if there are other things in the chat that I might not be seeing because I unfortunately dropped off, I wonder if you could take a look, but I have some questions right now as follow-up for our speakers. So, Alyssa, we know that because of the pandemic, the labor market is just continues to sort of bottom out, and it's turning into a she session where women are really kind of bearing the brunt of having to exit the workforce. I wonder if you are seeing anything in Forte's work that points to this, or that is being evidenced in the work that you continue to do on trying to get women into business leadership roles?
I think the first data point that I would point out is the enrollment this fall has increased quite a bit from previous years. And last year we saw the number stall a bit, and we thought this might be somewhat related to the pandemic. I think there was just trepidation about going back to business school at a time where things might be virtual, just might not be the same experience. But what we've seen this fall is that those numbers have ticked up, and pretty dramatically. So to see something go from 39 to 41% is a big jump year to year. And we were really happy to see that number occur. So I think though it's a time, we can reflect on it and say that maybe women were during the pandemic, really asking themselves the question, you know, is this something I want to do? Do I want to invest in myself? And they had the time to actually look around and think about what opportunities they wanted to take. That's really about the MBA piece. But I think when you look more globally, as you're mentioning, around what choices are women making, I do think we've seen this she session. We heard from the women in the Forte community that this has been challenging. I think less so that they were laid off and had to move on to some other opportunity, because I think the women we primarily work with were still employed, but I think the pressure of everything going on in the background is what really led some of them to a crisis of decision making. And so you may see that they've stepped back, that their spouse had to step forward, their significant other had to make a different choice, and then they've been left to kind of manage the household work, take care of the childcare obligations, all of those things. So definitely they're having to readjust and reposition to move forward, but it's been, it's definitely taken its toll, but we're heartened to see that the enrollment in MBA programs has gone up.
Thank you. That's very encouraging. There's a stat that from February of 2020 to February of this year, 2.3 million women left the workforce. Let's hope that there's buoyancy in taking the time, like you said, to get into business through MBA programs, and that the plug is in the drain.
Yes.
Thank you. I have a question for Leslie before I move into the chat. So I've heard mentioned a few times during the course of this conversation, problematic female representation in existing cases. Can you say more about what that means, what that looks like?
Problematic. Often in the past, not so much recently in the last year or two, but in the past, women were represented as sort of undervalued groups. And then also often the case where she might be the leader, it was around her doubting herself, or it was written about her doubting herself. It wasn't written in a positive way. Which is never the case in the male-led cases, right? So there was just, there's always, yeah, it's never quite as positive as a male leader's case. And often there is men rescuing women in the cases. So it's just, that's what basically is. So it's showing women as strong, whatever strong means to you. And I'm not meaning masculine. I'm just showing women as a strong leader, and describing her attributes, describing her background, where she's come from, what she's done. And that's what we mean when Gabby mentioned as well, in a positive light, right? Yeah. Not in a, I wasn't sure of myself and I wasn't sure that I would take this role and all of that sort of thing. So that's really what we're saying.
I think it's a really important aspect. There are just these very historic tropes about female qualities. And the thinking has been, well, they don't line up to being an objective leader. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we've had some questions come in on the chat. One is very encouraging from Hossein. Don't worry about the role of women in research. I have, hold on, I just lost it.
Hardly having a male student in my class.
Huzzah, that's awesome. Fabulous. And this is a question for Gabby, I believe. Does Emerald Publishing offer incentives for any authors to write more cases with female protagonists, or pursues or offers female CEOs or managers special incentives for them to publish? That's a very interesting question because it almost inverts the idea of a researcher finding an actual business, doing their field work, doing the theory, and then writing up a case. I wonder if you could comment.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a really interesting question. So I guess the launch of the Case Women competition was in part us wanting to do this. So we offer incentives generally to our case authors. So both ENCS and TCJ, we offer kind of nominal fees, payments to our authors for publishing a case study. But that's kind of flat across the board. So whether the case study has a male or female case protagonist, you know, the case is published, the kind of payment to the authors is made. And so with the launch of the Case for Women competition, this is something we really wanted to do. So that $12,000 prize fund for the 2021 competition is by far the largest prize fund we have for any of our case competitions. And I think, you know, that's really where we kind of want to focus our work at the minute. But I guess to kind of answer that question, no, we don't have a specific incentive for authors writing cases with female protagonists over male protagonists outside of the competition, if that makes sense. But I think it's a really interesting question. I think it's something that you know would kind of be interesting, I guess, for us to kind of go away and consider. And as Erica said, it is kind of inverting this idea. It's really interesting.
I think so. And I think that it speaks to operating with focused intentionality. There could be something in identifying companies that are run by women, or there's a female CEO, or even better, a Black CEO, and tapping them to partner up with researchers and almost as like a mentorship. Yes, we want to support you. Come in, talk to us, develop your case. So now I'm pitching ideas to you, Gabby. Sorry.
I wanted to mention something around, if it's okay, Erica, around the don't worry, the role of women in research, because my sense is there is a lot of women in research, right? There is. That's my experience as well, and that's fabulous. But there's not a lot of women leaders being written about in papers. So that's great, but how do we get them sort of into the limelight rather than sitting behind the light? That's all I would say.
Thanks for that follow-up thinking. There could be something in targeting some business schools globally and working with faculty to say, we want to partner up with you. We want your male students to find female-run companies. And again, it really is a call to arms, but it has to be done with laser sharp focus. We can't hope this organically happens if we want to sort of reverse the blood flow of women in cases and other underrepresented groups. Checking my watch. Let's see.
Any other questions out there? Anybody want to comment on what they've heard? Gabby.
Yep, sorry, I saw a question in the chat about the Case for Women competition. Someone asked, I assume that the case submitted needs a corporate release. And I know this is something me and Leslie have talked about before. So yes, any case where primary research has been conducted, we do need sign off from that organization to publish that case, and that's something that's going to be standard across all publishers, because you know if that research has been done and any kind of data or financial information is in that case, we do need that consent as a commercial publisher. We do allow cases submitted to the competition where secondary research has been carried out. And the reason we made that decision is we didn't want to exclude cases where the authors might not be able to get kind of individual direct personal exposure to that protagonist. So for example, you know, if it's someone particularly high profile and it's not someone who you can say, you know, can I have an interview with, but that's someone you really want to write a case about, we didn't want to exclude that. So in that circumstance, if any secondary research has been done and no interviews or kind of private financial information has been used, everything's in the public domain, you don't need case study consent. But I would caveat that, and I know Leslie will agree with me here, that part of the reason, you know, the intention of the case women is that the protagonist's voice is really coming across, and the students who are reading these cases can really kind of see themselves in the shoes of this female protagonist. And that happens, that's harder to do when only secondary research has been completed. And so we do really encourage, wherever possible, even if it is 90% secondary research, could you have a hour conversation, you know, record that with the protagonist or with people who worked with the protagonist if that's not possible. We really encourage that kind of wherever possible, because it's so important to have that kind of female voice really within the case study. But where that's not possible, and only secondary research has been carried out, the feedback we get from our editors is to include as many quotes as possible and try and make that voice still come across. But in those situations, corporate consent isn't required. So Leslie, I don't know if you kind of wanted to kind of add to that, or...
No, I think you're spot on. I think, yeah, that's yeah, spot on, basically. I've just noticed.
Oh, sorry.
No, there's just a few other questions, that's all. I was just noticing.
I was going to say, if anyone had any more specific questions on the kind of technical aspects of the competition, please do email me afterwards if we don't have a chance to get to them now. So are there any other questions there, Erica?
It's just a comment there. Can we have workshops or training to encourage female faculty to publish business case studies? Emerald, you might, I don't know whether you've got stuff on your site.
I have an answer for that question. If you go to GSU-CIBER website, we just finished a 3-part series of case writing, case development for global business run by Rebecca Morris. She's the editor of the case journal published by Emerald. So there should be lots of information, resources, and handouts from that series. Maybe I could ask a more general question to every one of you. So yes, gender is a very important factor in the diverse representation. Can you speak maybe just generally, or we actually need another webinar about this topic, about other categories of diversity, national origins, religion, age, race, the different kinds of representations?
Yeah, I mean, the research that I've done, it's all pretty disastrous, really. It's it's, you know, I'm being really blunt here, but it's not good. It's not great. It's also really quite hard to research. It's very hard to research because often you have to, you know, you have to go onto LinkedIn or Facebook or somewhere and actually find and see the person to really understand. And even then it's hard to know where culturally, where are they originally from, or where are they from now. But yes, there needs to be a lot of work on the different, you know, different groups, different diverse groups, because there isn't much, and it's pretty disaster. It's pretty awful. There's not much out there.
I was going to add to that, Leslie, that, you know, just having the, you know, pulling back a little bit from the cases and really doing more to educate faculty about how to provide a platform for all of those voices to be heard in the classroom. So in the absence of that in a case study, for the faculty member to say, you know, let's talk about this from the perspective, or maybe it's not even a different perspective, or maybe it is. Maybe you say to the class, let's talk about this from your perspective as a student from this country or a student from this geographic region. What's your take on this? Is this, you know, do you identify with this kind of leadership style? Is this the way you would have handled this situation? How have you seen this play out in your home country? And then The other option is to go and think about across every classroom experience, how often are you bringing those diverse perspectives to the forefront of what you're talking about? Are you having students read in the same industry how someone in China handled this problem versus how someone in the US handled this problem in a similar type of case? And I think that's the burden is on the faculty delivering that curriculum every semester. And faculty, that's not really part of their incentive package to go in and make sure they're hitting all of those bullets. It really is, they have to be open for the challenge, I guess. And I think the more conversation we could have with faculty about the importance of that and how it can broaden the perspective of future business leaders and let them have exposure to so many different ways of handling these problems, that would go a long way. And so that's maybe that's a future webinar, Leanne, is faculty talking about how they've done that in their own classroom and giving some advice to their peers about why it's important, what changes they saw in their students, and how tips for how to do it for other faculty.
Right, that's great. And I know all the cyber consortium, the group of cybers are preparing for a new cyber PhD academy in collaboration with the Academy of International Business to address the pipeline issues in the business faculty, because our faculty, if we look at our faculty members, is not diverse enough. Our leadership team is not diverse enough. So we're trying to address that. But you maybe in the last minute or so, you guys can talk about, you girls can talk about the, like what specific action items or things that people can do individually or faculty members can do next.
Okay, well, for me, it's about just build awareness. And, if you're teaching or writing cases or writing business text, just think about how are you writing that and how is it being read, right? So who's reading this? And it's sort of building your own awareness around this, really, for me. That's where it starts.
Erica, you have a closing thoughts?
Well, I completely concur on awareness. I think it is, if you need to, put a sticky up on your monitor, because Gabby and I were speaking recently about the underrepresentations of Blacks in business teaching cases as protagonists, company owners. I live in Boston, and if I Google Black-owned businesses, there's an entire directory right there. And there's also in North America, the National Black MBA Association, and they are dedicated to building up the pipeline. And we should always remember that people coming of age during this time are future students and our researchers. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is probably the defining characteristic of these persons. It's smart business to make your classrooms look like the world in higher education. So those are my closing thoughts.
Very great. I think our time is up. Thank you, Erica, Leslie, Elisa, Gabby, for these thought-provoking ideas, for presenting your data and insights. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please, reminder to please respond to our 5-question survey as you exit. Next week, we have a webinar on Africa. We look forward to seeing you again. Have a great day.